Martha Thompson had sworn 3 years ago that she would never touch another animal for as long as she lived. The promise was made in a veterinary clinic in rural Montana, standing over two bodies, her hands still covered in blood that refused to wash away no matter how hard she scrubbed. Dr. Richard Harrison, the man who had taught her everything about healing, lay motionless on the cold floor. Beside him, a young deer they had been trying to save from severe injuries took its final breath. It took only 20 minutes for Martha to lose everything that
Getting a
mattered.
puppy?
20 minutes
4,
of
found
desperate
abandoned.
attempts at resuscitation, of screaming into a phone for help that arrived too late, of watching life slip away from two beings she could not save. She closed the clinic the next day, sold every piece of equipment, and disappeared into the wilderness of the Glacier National
They're black
Park region,
wolves, not
determined
dogs.
to live out the rest of her days without ever facing that kind of loss again. If you are watching this story, you are part of something special. Every subscription to Wild Heart Stories helps us share more incredible true stories about the bonds that
You're my
connect
family.
us to the animal kingdom. When you subscribe, you are not just watching, you are helping us celebrate and protect these extraordinary relationships that remind us why life is beautiful. Please take a moment to subscribe and join our community of people who believe that love transcends every boundary nature creates. The cabin Martha bought with the last of her savings sat at the end of a dirt road that disappeared into the forest during heavy snowfall. It was exactly what she wanted. Isolation, silence,
The
distance from
town's
a world
petition
that had
has
taken too much from
3,000
her.
signatures.
The nearest town, a small community called Whitefish, was 45 minutes away by truck on good days.
We
Over an
made it.
hour, when winter storms made the roads impassable. Martha made the trip once every 2 weeks for supplies, speaking to no one beyond what was absolutely necessary, and returning to her sanctuary where the only sounds were wind through pine trees and the occasional call of eagles overhead. For 3 years, this was enough. She woke with the sun, chopped wood for the stove, read books by lantern light, and went to bed when darkness fell. The routine was safe, predictable, empty in a way that felt better than the alternative, which was caring about something and losing it all over again. Her hands, once steady and confident as they assisted Dr. Harrison with everything from routine vaccinations to emergency surgeries, now existed only to care for herself. She told herself this was fine. This was survival. This was all she deserved after failing when it mattered most. Everything changed on a morning in late April when the last of winter's snow was melting into streams that rushed down the mountainside. Martha was driving back from her biweekly supply run, her truck bed loaded with canned goods, flour, coffee, and the other essentials that kept her isolated existence functional. The road was muddy, potholed, and treacherous after the spring thaw. She was navigating carefully around a particularly deep rut when she saw the cardboard box sitting in the middle of the road. At first, she thought it was trash, something that had fallen from another vehicle. She considered driving around it, but something made her stop. Perhaps it was the way the box seemed deliberately placed rather than accidentally dropped. Perhaps it was the faint sound she heard when she turned off the engine, a sound so soft she almost convinced herself she had imagined it. She sat in the truck for a full minute, hands gripping the steering wheel, telling herself to drive away, to not get involved, to maintain the walls she had built so carefully. The sound came again, high-pitched, desperate, alive. Martha closed her eyes and felt something break inside her chest, something that had been frozen solid for 3 years. She opened the truck door and walked toward the box with legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. When she lifted the cardboard flaps and looked inside, her breath caught in her throat. 4 tiny creatures huddled together in the bottom of the box, their eyes still closed, their bodies covered in fur as black as midnight. They were so small, each one fitting easily in the palm of her hand. Their miniature mouths opened in silent cries, searching blindly for warmth and food they had not received in what must have been hours. One of them, the smallest, was barely moving. Martha knew immediately they would die without intervention. Whoever had left them here on a remote road where few vehicles passed had essentially sentenced them to death by exposure and starvation. She looked around, searching for any sign of the person responsible, but saw only empty forest and abandoned road. Her mind raced through possibilities. Unwanted puppies, too many in a litter, an owner who could not afford to keep them. The reasons did not matter. What mattered was the weight of 4 fragile lives in her hands and the choice she had to make in the next few seconds. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away, to put the box back down, get in her truck, and pretend she had never stopped. She had promised herself no more animals, no more attachment, no more devastating loss. But as she stood there, feeling the faint warmth of tiny bodies against her palms, she realized that some promises were impossible to keep. These creatures had not asked to be abandoned. They had not chosen to be left to die, and she was the only person in 50 miles who had the knowledge to save them. Martha carried the box to her truck with hands that trembled for reasons she could not fully name. She settled it carefully on the passenger seat, tucking an old blanket around the sides to keep the puppies secure during the drive. The smallest one, the one that had barely been moving, let out a weak whimper that cut through her like a blade. She recognized that sound. It was the sound of a creature fighting to survive against impossible odds. The drive back to the cabin took 30 minutes that felt like hours. Martha drove faster than she should have on the muddy road, hyper-aware of every bump and jolt that might harm her fragile cargo. Her mind was already cataloging what she needed: puppy formula, bottles, heating pad, clean blankets. She had none of these things. She had deliberately emptied her life of anything related to animal care. But 18 years of working alongside Dr. Harrison had taught her how to improvise, how to save lives with whatever was available. When she reached the cabin, Martha carried the box inside and set it near the wood stove, where residual heat would keep the puppies warm. She worked with the focused efficiency that came from years of veterinary experience, even as her hands shook with emotions she had thought were buried. She heated water on the stove, mixed it with the small amount of powdered milk she had for her coffee, and added a tiny bit of honey for calories. It was not proper puppy formula, but it would keep them alive until she could get to town tomorrow for supplies. Feeding 4 newborn puppies without proper bottles was a challenge that required patience and creativity. Martha used a clean eyedropper, carefully placing tiny amounts of the mixture into each small mouth, watching to make sure they swallowed rather than aspirated. The 3 larger puppies responded well, sucking eagerly at the dropper, their tiny paws kneading the air. But the smallest one, the one she had already started thinking of as hope in her mind, struggled. It took nearly an hour to get enough formula into the tiny creature to make a difference. By the time all 4 were fed and settled into a nest of soft towels in a box beside the stove, exhaustion hit Martha like a physical weight. She collapsed into her chair and stared at the puppies as they huddled together, their bellies finally full, their bodies relaxed in sleep. She had broken her promise. She had let something back into her carefully controlled world, and she had no idea what she was going to do next. Sleep did not come easily that night. Martha lay in bed listening to the occasional whimper from the box in the other room and wondered what kind of dogs these might be. Their fur was unusually dark, pure black, without any markings. Their ears were slightly pointed even at this young age. Their paws seemed large for their body size. She mentally ran through breeds: Black German Shepherd, maybe, Black Labrador mix, possibly, some kind of Shepherd and Husky combination. The remoteness of the location suggested working dogs, the kind kept by ranchers or hunters in the area. Someone had bred them and decided 4 puppies were too many to keep. The next morning, Martha drove to Whitefish before dawn, leaving the puppies sleeping in their warm box. She bought proper puppy formula, bottles, a heating pad, puppy pads for accidents, and several bags of eventual puppy food for when they were old enough. The clerk at the general store, a friendly woman named Helen who had tried for 3 years to make conversation with the reclusive woman from the mountain, smiled at the pile of supplies. "Getting a puppy?" Helen asked, genuine warmth in her voice. "4 of them," Martha replied, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "Found them abandoned." Helen's smile faded into concern. "Abandoned? That is terrible. Well, they're lucky you found them. You let me know if you need any help, all right?" Martha nodded, paid, and left before the conversation could go any further. She was not ready for friendliness. She was barely ready for the responsibility currently sleeping in a box beside her wood stove. The first week was a blur of feedings every 3 hours, cleaning, and constant monitoring. Martha fell into the rhythm with a familiarity that felt both natural and terrifying. This was what she had done for 18 years alongside Dr. Harrison. Nurture, heal, save. She had been good at it. Too good, perhaps, because when she failed, the fall was devastating. But these puppies were not failing. They were thriving. By day 5, their eyes began to open, revealing irises of deep amber that seemed to glow against their black fur. By day 10, they were crawling around their box with increasing coordination. By week 2, they had distinct personalities that Martha found herself cataloging despite her better judgment. The largest male, the one who always pushed to the front during feeding time and slept in the most dominant position, she mentally named Shadow. The female who watched everything with intelligent eyes and learned quickly where the food came from, she thought of as Luna. The male who was constantly curious, who escaped the box first and explored every corner of the cabin, became Midnight in her thoughts. And the smallest, the one who had been barely alive that first day but fought with surprising determination to keep up with her siblings, remained Hope. Martha told herself the names did not matter. She was fostering them until they were old enough to be adopted. She would take them to the animal shelter in Kalispell in a few weeks. Someone else would give them permanent homes. This was temporary. She could handle temporary. But as weeks turned into a month and then 2 months, she found reasons to delay. They were too young for adoption. They needed more socialization first. She should wait until after their first vaccinations. The excuses piled up like snow in winter, and underneath each one was a truth she did not want to face. She was becoming attached. By month 3, the puppies were no longer puppies. They were adolescent dogs with long legs, powerful jaws, and an energy that required hours of outdoor play each day. Martha found herself hiking the mountain trails with 4 black shadows racing ahead of her, their joy in the wilderness infectious. They were smart, learning commands with ease. They were loyal, never straying far from her side. They were gentle with her despite their growing size, seeming to understand that their human was fragile in ways they were not. But there were things that bothered her, small things at first. The way their teeth seemed sharper than normal dog teeth. The way their howls, when they called to each other across the forest, had a quality that made her skin prickle. The way they moved through the trees with a grace that seemed too wild, too predatory. The way local dogs in Whitefish reacted with fear and aggression when she took them to town, even though her 4 were perfectly behaved. By month 4, Martha could no longer ignore the signs. These dogs were different. Their ears were too large, their snouts too elongated, their paws too massive. Their behavior was too pack-oriented, and their hunting instinct, when they cornered a rabbit on one of their hikes, was too efficient, too brutal, too perfectly coordinated. She made an appointment with the only veterinarian in the area, Dr. Samuel Matthews, a man in his 50s who had taken over several rural practices when their owners retired. She loaded all 4 dogs into her truck bed, noting how they had to curl up to fit now, and drove to his clinic in Kalispell with a growing sense of dread. Dr. Matthews was a soft-spoken man with kind eyes and gentle hands. He greeted Martha professionally, showed her into an examination room, and began examining the first dog, Shadow, with practiced efficiency. She watched his expression change as he palpated the body, checked the teeth, looked into the eyes. He moved on to Luna, then Midnight, then Hope. With each examination, his movements became slower, more deliberate. When he finally looked up at Martha, his face was pale. "Mrs. Thompson," he said carefully, "where did you say you found these animals?" "Abandoned on the roadside," Martha replied, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "In a cardboard box, for months ago." Dr. Matthews nodded slowly. He walked to the door, closed it, and returned to stand in front of her. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "Mrs. Thompson, these are not dogs." The words hung in the air between them. Martha felt the world tilt sideways. "What do you mean they are not dogs?" she asked, though some part of her already knew the answer. Dr. Matthews took a breath. "These are wolves. Black wolves, specifically Canis lupus with a rare melanistic mutation. And not just any wolves. These are 4-month-old wolf pups, the rarest color variant in North America. The chances of finding 4 black wolves together, abandoned alive on a random roadside, are astronomically small. Martha stared at him, at the 4 creatures she had raised from near death. At Shadow, who was watching her with amber eyes full of trust. At Luna, whose intelligence had always seemed beyond canine. At Midnight, whose wild curiosity suddenly made perfect sense. At Hope, the smallest, who had survived against all odds and now stood beside her with absolute devotion. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I wish it were," Dr. Matthews replied. "But Mrs. Thompson, you need to understand what this means. These are federally protected animals under the Endangered Species Act. It is illegal to possess, raise, or keep wolves without proper permits and facilities. I am required by law to report this to the Fish and Wildlife Service. They will have to be removed and placed in a proper wildlife sanctuary." Martha felt her legs give out. She sat down hard on the examination room bench, her hands gripping the edge until her knuckles went white. The room spun, her vision blurred. She had raised wolves for 4 months. She had bottle-fed, nurtured, loved, and bonded with 4 wild predators who should never have survived, should never have trusted a human, should never have become the family she never meant to have. And now they were going to be taken away. The silence in the examination room stretched until it became unbearable. Martha stared at Dr. Matthews, her mind refusing to process what he had just said. Wolves. She had raised wolves. The creatures currently pressing against her legs, seeking comfort from her obvious distress, were not the dogs she had convinced herself they were. They were wild animals, predators, federally protected and completely illegal to possess. "How long do I have?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Matthews sat down on the stool across from her, his expression pained. "I have to make the call today. The Fish and Wildlife Service will likely send officers within 24 to 48 hours to assess the situation and arrange transport to an appropriate facility. Mrs. Thompson, I am truly sorry. I can see that you have cared for these animals, but the law is clear. Wolves cannot be kept as pets." Martha looked down at Hope, the smallest of the 4, who had climbed into her lap despite being far too large for such behavior. The young wolf's amber eyes looked up at her with complete trust, with love that transcended species, with a bond that Martha had tried so hard not to form but had formed anyway. 18 years of veterinary training told her that Dr. Matthews was right. These were wild animals. They belonged in sanctuaries designed for their needs, with professionals trained in wildlife management. But 4 months of raising them from near death told her something different. These wolves knew her as their mother. She knew them as her children. The bond was real, whether it was supposed to exist or not. "Can I take them home?" she asked. "Just until the officers come? Please." Dr. Matthews hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and compassion. Finally, he nodded. "I will tell them you are cooperating fully. But, Mrs. Thompson, you need to prepare yourself. These animals will be taken to a sanctuary, possibly in another state. The chances of you seeing them again are very small." The drive back to the cabin was the longest 30 minutes of Martha's life. The 4 wolves rode in the truck bed as always, their black fur rippling in the wind, their tongues hanging out in expressions that looked like joy. They had no idea their world was about to end. They trusted her to keep them safe, to keep their family together, and she was about to fail them, just like she had failed Dr. Harrison and the deer he died trying to save. When they reached the cabin, Martha let the wolves out and watched them race into the forest to play, as they did every evening. Shadow led the way, his powerful body moving with lethal grace. Luna followed close behind, her intelligence evident in the way she navigated the terrain. Midnight veered off to investigate something interesting, his curiosity undiminished. And Hope, always the smallest, but never willing to be left behind, brought up the rear with determination that made Martha's heart ache. She stood on the porch and watched them until they disappeared into the trees. For 4 months, this had been their life. Freedom, family, love. How could she let them be locked in cages, even nice ones, even in sanctuaries designed for their welfare? How could she watch them loaded into transport vehicles and driven away to a life where they would never run through Montana forests again, never sleep in a pile beside her fireplace, never look at her with eyes that said she was their whole world? That night, Martha could not sleep. She lay in bed listening to the four wolves breathing in their sleeping positions around her room. They had long outgrown the box by the stove and now slept wherever they chose, which was always as close to her as possible. Shadow typically positioned himself by the door, the natural guardian. Luna curled up at the foot of the bed. Midnight claimed a corner where he could watch the window. And Hope, always Hope, slept pressed against Martha's side, her warmth a constant reminder of the fragile life Martha had saved on that roadside 4 months ago. The knock came at 10 o'clock the next morning. Martha had been expecting it, dreading it, preparing for it since dawn. She opened the door to find 2 officers in Fish and Wildlife Service uniforms standing on her porch. Behind them sat a large van equipped with transport crates. "Mrs. Martha Thompson?" the older officer asked. He was in his 50s, weathered by years of outdoor work, his expression professionally neutral. "Yes," Martha replied. "I am Officer James Brooks, and this is Officer Linda Martinez. We are here about the wolves. May we come in?" Martha stepped aside, and the officers entered her cabin. The 4 wolves, who had been lounging near the fireplace, immediately stood at attention. Shadow's hackles raised slightly. Luna moved to position herself between the strangers and Martha. Midnight's ears flattened. Hope pressed against Martha's legs. Officer Brooks stopped dead in his tracks, his hand instinctively moving toward the tranquilizer gun on his belt. Officer Martinez inhaled sharply. They stood frozen, 2 trained wildlife officers suddenly face to face with 4 black wolves in a residential cabin. "Jesus Christ," Brooks whispered. "Dr. Matthews said wolves, but I thought maybe wolf dogs, hybrids. These are pure Canis lupus, black phase, all 4 of them." "They are not going to hurt you," Martha said quietly. "They have never shown aggression toward any person." "Ma'am, these are apex predators," Officer Martinez replied, her voice tight. "The fact that they have not shown aggression yet does not mean they won't. This is an incredibly dangerous situation." "Dangerous?" Martha felt anger rise in her chest, hot and sharp. "They have lived with me for 4 months. They sleep in my bed. They follow me on hikes. They are gentle and obedient. The only danger here is what you are about to do to them." Officer Brooks held up a hand. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand you have formed an attachment, but you must understand that these animals are wild. Whatever bond you think you have built, their instincts will eventually override it. A wolf is not a dog. They cannot be domesticated in a single generation or even multiple generations. What you have done, however well-intentioned, is illegal and dangerous." "I did not know they were wolves," Martha shot back. "I found abandoned puppies dying on a roadside. I saved their lives. Would you rather I had left them to die?" "Of course not," Officer Martinez said, more gently. "You did the right thing saving them. But now they need to go to a proper facility where they can be cared for by professionals who understand wolf behavior and biology." Martha looked at the 4 wolves, at Shadow, whose protective stance made it clear he would defend her if necessary, at Luna, whose intelligent eyes were assessing the strangers for threat level, at Midnight, who had moved to the window as if planning an escape route. "Will they be together?" The officers exchanged glances. "We will do our best," Officer Martinez said, "but it depends on pack dynamics, space availability, and behavioral assessments. They may need to be separated." "No." The word came out harder than Martha intended. "You cannot separate them. They are siblings. They have never been apart. Separating them would be cruel." "Ma'am, we do not have control over sanctuary decisions," Officer Brooks replied. "Our job is to transport them safely. What happens after that is up to the wildlife management team." Martha felt the world closing in around her. She had failed again. She had let herself care, let herself believe she could save something, and now it was all falling apart, just like it had 3 years ago in Dr. Harrison's clinic. The weight of it pressed down on her chest until breathing became difficult. "Can I have one more day?" she heard herself ask. "Please, Just one more day with them. The officers looked at each other. Officer Martinez seemed sympathetic, but Officer Brooks shook his head. Ma'am, every day we delay is another day these wild animals are in an inappropriate environment. We need to transport them today. One day will not make any difference, Martha insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. They have been here 4 months. One more day will not change anything except giving me time to say goodbye properly. Please. Officer Brooks started to refuse, but Officer Martinez touched his arm. James, look at them, she said quietly. Look at how calm they are, how bonded. One more day. We can come back tomorrow morning. Brooks frowned, clearly uncomfortable, but after a long moment he nodded. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp. Have them ready for transport. If there are any incidents between now and then, any sign of aggression or danger, you call us immediately. Understood? Understood, Martha whispered. After the officers left, Martha sank onto the floor. The 4 wolves immediately surrounded her, pressing close, sensing her distress. Shadow laid his massive head in her lap. Luna leaned against her shoulder. Midnight nuzzled her face. Hope whimpered softly, a sound Martha had not heard since those first desperate days. I am so sorry, Martha told them, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry I cannot keep you safe. The rest of that day passed in a blur of grief. Martha took the wolves on one final hike through the forest they loved. She watched them play, race, hunt, and exist in the wildness that was their true nature. She memorized every detail, the way Shadow's ears perked when he heard distant sounds, the way Luna's coat shimmered blue-black in the sunlight, the way Midnight's curiosity led him to investigate every interesting scent, the way Hope, despite being the smallest, never gave up trying to keep pace with her larger siblings. That night, Martha cooked them a feast of meat and vegetables. The 4 wolves ate with enthusiasm, not knowing it was a farewell meal. Afterward, they settled around the fireplace in their usual positions. Martha sat with them, running her hands through their thick fur, feeling the solid warmth of their bodies, trying to memorize the sensation of their presence. It was past midnight when Hope suddenly stood up and vomited. The young wolf swayed on her feet, her eyes unfocused. Before Martha could react, Hope collapsed onto her side, her breathing rapid and shallow. No, Martha breathed. No, 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 not now. She dropped to her knees beside the smallest wolf and began a rapid examination with hands that moved automatically through 18 years of veterinary training. Elevated heart rate, pale gums, distended abdomen, fever. The symptoms pointed to multiple possibilities, none of them good. Poisoning, infection, blockage. Without diagnostic equipment, Martha could not be sure, but she knew with absolute certainty that Hope was critically ill and declining fast. Shadow, Luna, and Midnight gathered around their sister, whining softly. They knew something was wrong. They looked at Martha with eyes that begged her to fix it, to make Hope better, to save their sister like she had saved all of them 4 months ago. Martha's mind raced. The nearest emergency veterinary clinic was in Kalispell, 45 minutes away. By the time she got Hope there, it might be too late. And even if they arrived in time, would the vet treat a wolf? Would they call the authorities immediately? Would they take Hope away while she was fighting for her life? She looked at the supplies she still had from her days assisting Dr. Harrison. Basic medications for equipment, antibiotics, painkillers, tools for minor surgeries. She had kept everything despite her vow never to practice again, unable to fully let go of the skills that had defined her for nearly 2 decades. Could she do this? Could she diagnose and treat Hope without proper equipment, without the guidance of a licensed veterinarian, without the safety net of a clinic? If she failed, Hope would die. If she did not try, Hope would definitely die. The choice was no choice at all. Martha carried Hope to the kitchen table and cleared it with one sweep of her arm. She grabbed her medical supplies and laid them out with shaking hands. Shadow, Luna, and Midnight pressed close, unwilling to leave their sister. Martha looked into their amber eyes and saw trust, so complete it made her want to scream. I need you to stay back, she told the 3 wolves. Please, I need room to work. Impossibly, they seemed to understand. They moved to the edge of the room, but did not leave, their eyes never wavering from Hope's prone form. Martha began to work. Palpation revealed a hard mass in Hope's abdomen, possible intestinal blockage. She thought back to the past few days, trying to remember if Hope had eaten anything unusual. Then it hit her. 3 days ago, Hope had found an old bone during their hike, an elk bone probably left by hunters. Martha had taken it away, but not before Hope had gnawed on it for several minutes. Had she swallowed a sharp fragment? Was it now lodged in her intestinal tract, causing obstruction and infection? If Martha was right, Hope needed surgery, immediate surgery. Without it, the blockage would cause sepsis and death within hours. With it, there was a chance, a small chance, but a chance nonetheless. Martha stood at the table with her hands hovering over the young wolf's body. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was insane. She was not a licensed veterinarian. She had not performed surgery in 3 years. She had no anesthesiologist, no monitoring equipment, no backup if something went wrong. If she operated and Hope died on this kitchen table, it would be Dr. Harrison all over again. Another life lost while under her care, another failure she would carry forever. But if she did nothing, Hope would die anyway. And unlike 3 years ago, when Martha had been powerless to change the outcome, this time she had knowledge, skills, and tools that might make a difference. Martha looked at Shadow, Luna, and Midnight, at 3 wolves who trusted her to save their sister, at a family she had not meant to create but could not imagine losing, at creatures who had taught her that love did not always follow the rules, that bonds could form in unexpected ways, that sometimes the heart knew things the mind refused to accept. She took a deep breath and began to prepare Hope for surgery. If this was her last chance to save one of them, she would take it. If this was her redemption for failures past, she would seize it. If this was the moment that defined whether she was a coward who ran from pain or a healer who faced it, she would choose to be brave. At 2 o'clock in the morning, in a remote cabin in Montana, a woman who had sworn never to heal again cut into the body of a wolf she loved like a daughter, searching for the thing that was killing her, praying to any force that might be listening that her hands would remember what her heart had never forgotten. Outside, the forest held its breath. Inside, 3 black wolves watched their sister's life hang in the balance, and the only person in the world who could save her worked with hands that had once failed but refused to fail again. The bone fragment was 3 inches long, jagged and sharp, lodged deep in Hope's small intestine, exactly where Martha had suspected it would be. Her hands, steadier than she had any right to expect, worked with precision she thought she had lost 3 years ago. Every motion was deliberate, every decision calculated. She was no longer Martha Thompson, the isolated widow. She was Martha Thompson, the veterinary assistant who had helped save hundreds of lives alongside Dr. Harrison. The skills were still there, buried beneath grief and guilt, waiting for the moment she needed them most. 2 hours into the surgery, Martha carefully extracted the bone fragment and examined the damaged tissue. The intestine was inflamed but intact, no perforation, no advanced sepsis. She had caught it in time, barely in time, but in time. She irrigated the area with sterile solution, administered antibiotics directly into the abdominal cavity, and began the delicate process of closing the incision with sutures that would hold despite the stress of a young wolf's active lifestyle. Shadow, Luna, and Midnight never moved from their vigil. 3 pairs of amber eyes watched every motion with an intensity that felt almost human. When Martha finally tied off the last suture and stepped back, exhausted and shaking, the 3 wolves approached the table. They sniffed Hope carefully, their noses detecting something Martha could only hope was the scent of healing rather than dying. Shadow laid his head gently beside his sister's. Luna licked Hope's face with infinite tenderness. Midnight whined softly, a sound of worry and love combined. "She's going to be okay," Martha told them, and prayed she was telling the truth. The rest of the night passed in fragments. Martha set up a recovery area near the fire with Hope lying on the softest blanket she owned. She administered pain medication, monitored vital signs, and watched for any complications. The other 3 wolves refused to sleep. They stayed with Hope through the dark hours, occasionally looking at Martha as if checking that she was still there, still keeping watch, still being the mother who saved them. Dawn came slowly, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and pink. Hope's eyes fluttered open. The young wolf tried to stand, swayed, and laid back down with a soft whimper. But she was awake, alert, alive. Martha felt tears stream down her face for what felt like the 100th time in 24 hours. The knock on the door came at precisely 9 o'clock. Officers Brooks and Martinez stood on the porch, with a transport van idling behind them. Martha opened the door, but did not invite them in. "Are the wolves ready for transport?" Officer Brooks asked. "No," Martha replied. "One of them had emergency surgery last night. She's in no condition to be moved." Officer Martinez's eyebrows shot up. "Surgery? You perform surgery on a wolf?" "I am a trained veterinary assistant with 18 years of experience," Martha said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "Hope had an intestinal blockage. If I had not operated, she would have died. She needs at least a week of recovery before she can handle transport stress." Officer Brooks frowned deeply. "Ma'am, you are not licensed to perform veterinary procedures, especially on protected wildlife. This complicates the situation significantly. We need to see the animal." Martha stepped aside reluctantly. The officers entered and stopped at the sight of Hope lying on blankets by the fire, her abdomen neatly sutured, her siblings arranged protectively around her. The young wolf lifted her head weakly and looked at the strangers without fear or aggression, just confusion about why her pack's territory was being invaded. Officer Martinez knelt at a careful distance and examined Hope from afar with a trained eye. "The suturing looks professional," she admitted. "Clean incisions, proper technique." "You said intestinal blockage?" "Bone fragment," Martha confirmed. 3 inches elk bone, probably from a hunter's kill. I removed it successfully. The intestine was damaged but not perforated. I administered antibiotics and pain management. She should make a full recovery with proper post-operative care. Officer Brooks pulled Officer Martinez aside, and they spoke in low voices. Martha could not hear the conversation, but she saw Martinez gesturing emphatically while Brooks shook his head repeatedly. Finally, they turned back to face her. "Mrs. Thompson, this is an impossible situation," Brooks said. "These animals are federally protected. They cannot remain here. But transporting a post-surgical wolf is also not advisable. We need to consult with our supervisor and the sanctuary about the best course of action." "While you consult, they stay with me," Martha said firmly. "Hope needs round-the-clock care. She needs monitoring for infection, regular medication, and a stress-free environment. Separating her from her siblings right now could cause psychological trauma that compromises her physical healing. Any veterinarian or wildlife biologist will tell you the same thing." Martinez nodded slowly. "She's right, James. Pack separation during recovery is a significant stressor. We should at least wait until the wolf is stable." Brooks looked like he wanted to argue, but professional obligation won out. "1 week," he said. "We will return in 1 week. At that time, all 4 wolves will be transported, regardless of recovery status. And Mrs. Thompson, there will be an investigation into your unauthorized veterinary practice. Saving the wolf's life does not excuse breaking federal wildlife laws." After they left, Martha sank onto the floor beside Hope. The young wolf nuzzled her hand weakly, and Martha felt her heart break into smaller pieces. She had bought 1 week. 1 week before her family was torn apart. 1 week before she lost the only creatures who had made her want to live again after 3 years of hollow existence. The next 6 days passed in a rhythm of care and dread. Hope healed with remarkable speed, her youth and strong constitution working in her favor. By day 3, she was walking carefully. By day 5, she was attempting to play with her siblings despite Martha's strict orders to rest. The sutures held perfectly, no infection developed. It was everything Martha had hoped for, and somehow the worst thing that could have happened, because now Hope was healthy enough to be taken away. Martha spent every spare moment with the 4 wolves, long hikes through the forest where they ran free, evenings by the fire where they slept in their familiar pile, mornings watching the sunrise from the porch with 4 black bodies pressed against her. She was memorizing them, building a library of memories to survive on when they were gone. On the 6th day, Helen from the general store in Whitefish drove up to the cabin unannounced. She parked her truck and approached the porch where Martha sat surrounded by wolves. "I heard what happened," Helen said without preamble. "The whole town has heard. There's a lot of talk about you and these wolves." Martha tensed. "What kind of talk?" "The divided kind," Helen replied. "Some folks think you're crazy and dangerous, keeping wild animals around. But others think what you did is remarkable, saving their lives, raising them, operating on one to save her. There's a petition going around." "A petition?" Helen smiled. "To allow you to keep them, or at least to keep them local instead of shipping them across the state. About 60 people have signed so far. It's not much, but it's something. Thought you should know you're not alone in this." After Helen left, Martha sat with the information for a long time. 60 people, 60 strangers who had decided that what she had built with these wolves mattered enough to fight for. It would not be enough to change federal law, but it meant something. It meant she had not been invisible up here on her mountain for 3 years. People had noticed. People cared. The 7th day dawned cold and overcast. Martha woke before sunrise with a sense of impending loss, so profound it felt physical. This was the last morning. By noon, Officers Brooks and Martinez would arrive. By evening, Shadow, Luna, Midnight, and Hope would be in cages, and she would be alone again in a cabin that would feel haunted by their absence. She decided to take them on one final hike, one last run through the forest, one last moment of freedom before everything changed. The 5 of them set out into the woods as the sun rose, painting long shadows through the pine trees. They were 2 miles from the cabin when Martha heard the sound, a deep rumbling growl that made every hair on her body stand on end. The 4 wolves froze instantly, their bodies going rigid with alert. Shadow's hackles rose. Luna's ears flattened. Midnight positioned himself between Martha and the direction of the sound. Hope, still recovering but increasingly strong, pressed close to Martha's legs. The grizzly bear emerged from the brush 30 feet ahead. It was massive, easily 600 pounds of muscle and predatory power, a male by the size. It swung its enormous head toward them and huffed, a sound that communicated clear territorial aggression. Martha's blood turned to ice. She had encountered bears before, in 3 years of mountain living. The protocol was clear. Make yourself large, back away slowly, do not run, do not make direct eye contact, appear non-threatening. But the bear was already agitated. Perhaps they had accidentally come between it and a cached food source. Perhaps it was simply having a bad day. Whatever the reason, the grizzly dropped to all 4s and charged. Everything happened simultaneously. Martha stumbled backward. The 4 wolves launched themselves forward as one unit. Shadow hit the bear's shoulder with enough force to knock the massive animal sideways. Luna went for the exposed flank. Midnight attacked the rear legs. Hope, despite being post-surgical and half the size of her siblings, lunged at the bear's face with teeth bared. The forest exploded into violence. The bear roared, a sound that shook the trees. It swiped at Shadow with claws that could eviscerate a wolf in one motion. Shadow dodged barely and countered with a bite to the bear's foreleg. Luna was tossed aside by a massive paw but rolled and came back instantly. Midnight's teeth found purchase on the bear's haunch, drawing blood. Hope harried the front, forcing the bear to divide its attention. Martha screamed at them to stop, to run, to save themselves, but the wolves fought with the coordinated precision of a pack defending its own. They were not attacking to kill. They were buying time, creating an opening, forcing the bear to focus on them instead of the vulnerable human behind them. Shadow took a hit that sent him rolling. He came up limping but did not retreat. Luna received a glancing blow that knocked her into a tree trunk. She shook her head and returned to the fight. The bear, realizing it was facing 4 determined predators instead of easy prey, began to back away. The wolves pressed their advantage, driving it back step by step, their coordinated movements speaking of intelligence and strategy beyond mere instinct. Finally, The grizzly turned and fled into the forest. The wolves pursued for 50 yards to ensure it was truly gone, then returned to Martha at full speed. They circled her, checking her for injuries with frantic sniffing and gentle nudges. Shadow was bleeding from a cut on his shoulder. Luna had a bruise forming on her ribs. Midnight limped slightly. Hope's surgical incision had held, but she was exhausted. Martha collapsed to her knees and gathered all 4 wolves to her. They had saved her life. These wild predators, these federally protected animals who were supposed to be too dangerous to keep, had put themselves between her and death without hesitation. They had fought a grizzly bear, an animal that outweighed each of them by hundreds of pounds, to protect their mother. "You crazy, beautiful, impossible creatures," Martha sobbed into their fur.
"You saved me."
"You saved me." Shadow licked her face. Luna pressed against her shoulder. Midnight laid his head in her lap. Hope curled into her arms, right over the heart that beat for all of them. They stayed that way for a long time before finally beginning the careful journey back to the cabin. Martha treated their injuries with the gentleness of a mother and the skill of a medical professional. She cleaned wounds, checked for serious damage, and administered pain medication as needed. None of the injuries were life-threatening. The wolves had fought smart, using pack tactics to minimize individual risk while maximizing collective effect. Officers Brooks and Martinez arrived at noon as scheduled. They took one look at Martha's face, at the bandaged wolves, and immediately demanded to know what happened. Martha told them everything. The bear, the attack, the wolves' coordinated defense, the fact that she would be dead if not for the 4 animals they were here to take away. Officer Martinez stared at her in shock. "They fought off a grizzly? All 4 of them together?" "They saved my life," Martha said simply. "These wolves that you say are too wild to keep, too dangerous to trust, put themselves between me and death. They are my family. I am their mother. That bond is real, whether it fits your regulations or not." Officer Brooks was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Martha could not hear the conversation, but she watched his expression change from bureaucratic firmness to something softer. When he hung up, he looked at her with new eyes. "That was my supervisor," Brooks said. "I told her what you told me. She is contacting the director of the Montana Wildlife Sanctuary and the regional fish and wildlife coordinator. What you have done here is unprecedented, raising 4 orphaned black wolves to healthy adulthood, successfully treating one of them in emergency surgery, creating a bond strong enough that they defended you from a grizzly. There is no protocol for this situation because it has never happened before." "So, what does that mean?" Martha asked, afraid to hope. "It means we are not taking them today," Officer Martinez said quietly. "It means there is going to be a review, a comprehensive evaluation of the situation, the possibility of creating a special permit or guardianship arrangement that allows you to keep them under strict monitoring and guidelines." Martha felt her legs give out. She sat down hard on the porch steps. "You mean they might be able to stay?" "I mean it is possible," Brooks replied carefully. "Not probable, not guaranteed, but possible. What you have accomplished here, Mrs. Thompson, is extraordinary. 4 black wolves raised from near death, living in harmony with a human, that is research gold, that is conservation potential, that is a story that challenges everything we think we know about wolf behavior and human-animal bonds. People need to study this, understand it, learn from it." Over the next 3 months, Martha's cabin became a hub of activity. Wildlife biologists came to observe the wolves. Behavioral specialists conducted studies. Veterinarians examined the animals and declared them remarkably healthy. Journalists wrote articles. Conservation groups debated the implications. The town of Whitefish, once wary, became protective of their local woman and her impossible family. The petition Helen had mentioned grew from 60 signatures to over 3,000. Letters of support poured in from across the country. Wildlife experts testified about the educational and research value of Martha's situation. Slowly, impossibly, the bureaucratic machine that had been prepared to separate a family began to consider that maybe, just maybe, some rules existed to be challenged. The final decision came on a cold day in December. Martha was granted a special federal permit as a wildlife guardian. Her property was designated as a private wolf sanctuary with strict protocols. She would receive regular inspections. The wolves would be monitored for health and behavior. She would document everything for research purposes. In exchange, Shadow, Luna, Midnight, and Hope could stay with her permanently. The day the official letter arrived, Martha sat on her porch with 4 black wolves sprawled around her and cried tears she did not know she still had in her. She thought about the promise she had made 3 years ago to never touch another animal. She thought about the cardboard box on a Montana roadside that had changed everything. She thought about Dr. Harrison and the lives they had saved together, and the ones they could not. She thought about Hope's surgery and the grisly attack and every impossible moment that had brought her to this one. Shadow lifted his head and looked at her with amber eyes full of understanding. Luna nuzzled her hand. Midnight rolled over to expose his belly in the ultimate gesture of trust. Hope climbed into her lap despite being far too large, curling up like she had when she was a dying newborn, for pounds of black fur. "We made it," Martha whispered to them. "We actually made it." As the sun set over the Montana wilderness, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and purple, a woman and 4 wolves sat together in the profound silence of belonging. They were an impossible family, a contradiction of nature, a bond that should never have formed but could never be broken. Martha had spent 3 years running from love because loss had shattered her. 4 abandoned wolf pups had taught her that some things were worth the risk of breaking again, that healing was possible, that family came in unexpected forms, that the heart, whether human or wolf, understood connections deeper than any law or logic could explain. In saving them, she had saved herself. In raising them, she had been raised back from her own death. In loving them, she had learned to love living again. The wild hearts of 4 black wolves and 1 broken woman had found each other in the vast Montana wilderness and proven what poets and dreamers had always known but science struggled to accept. Love transcends species, family is chosen, and sometimes the most impossible bonds are the ones that save us all.